with Nicholas Witchell.
The train robber Ronald Biggs is tonight back inside a British prison. After 35 years on the run, Biggs was arrested when he returned to Britain. A bank holiday meeting of the cabinet to finalise plans for the general election. And a farmer on Exmoor barricades his gates to stop the slaughter of his livestock. Good evening. 35 years after he escaped from Wandsworth Prison, the train robber Ronald Biggs is tonight back behind the bars of a British jail. He was flown back from his refuge in Brazil this morning. Within minutes of landing, he was arrested by police. After a brief court appearance, Biggs, who's 71 and who suffered several strokes, was taken to Belmarsh High Security Prison. His lawyer said he wants to appeal against his 30-year sentence, 28 years of which he has still to serve.
Ronnie! Ronnie!
These are the first pictures of Ronnie Biggs back in custody, dazed and frail but not too ill to return to jail. After 35 years as a fugitive, he touched down at RAF Northolt in Middlesex, where police boarded the aircraft and charged him with being unlawfully at large from Wandsworth Jail, a reference to his escape from there in 1965. Dozens of police surrounded the airfield as Biggs was put in a van with blacked-out windows and driven away, though not without incidents. He was taken to be checked by a police doctor and deemed fit enough to appear in court. This is where life on the run has ended for Ronnie Biggs. There was no question he would be rearrested. The authorities were keen to take control and ensure, at this stage anyway, he would in no way be treated as a special case. His appearance before West London magistrates lasted 8 minutes. Biggs shuffled in with a walking stick, dribbling slightly, and answered questions with a grunt. He was ordered to serve the remaining 28 years of his jail sentence. Lawyers are expected to say it's excessive and he's too old and sick.
In due course, he will seek a hearing before the Court of Appeal in respect of his outstanding sentence. All he seeks is a fair and balanced hearing at which all relevant issues can be addressed.
Ronald Biggs was one of a gang which robbed a train of a then record £2.5 million. The driver was seriously hurt. Biggs escaped from prison and lived on the run in Brazil. But debt-ridden with rising medical costs, he accepted an offer from the Sun newspaper for financial help to come back to Britain. The Press Complaints Commission's now investigating the Sun's role. The paper claims it acted in the public interest. One of the detectives who originally investigated Biggs welcomes his return.
One thing that I hope will not come out of all this is that Biggs and the rest of the train robbers will be treated as heroes, because they're anything but heroes.
This has not been a heroic return. Ronald Biggs has been taken to Belmarsh High Security Jail in southeast London, where he'll initially be kept in the hospital wing. This will be his first night in a UK jail for more than 3 decades. Margaret Gilmore, BBC News.
Well, our correspondent Duncan Kennedy is outside Belmarsh Prison now. Duncan, is it thought that he is, as Margaret Gilmore was suggesting, is he in the hospital or is he in a regular high-security cell?
Well, the Home Office aren't saying officially, but it is understood he is in the hospital wing here. It's known he does need medical tests just to see how fit or ill he is. Belmarsh is very well equipped. It has a 3-storey medical wing and has all the modern facilities. The jail itself is only 10 years old. Those tests will be carried out over the next few days. But if it's found, Nick, that he's also healthy enough to go onto the main wing, then that's where he'll go to join something like 800 other inmates here at Belmarsh. Mr. Biggs himself, though, will be refined to the Category A status, and that will entitle him to a cell on his own.
Clearly, as his lawyer was indicating, it is his intention to appeal against the length of his remaining sentence. Is anything known about how that's going to proceed?
Not the timescale or the exact arguments they'll be putting forward. It is in respect to the length of the sentence, not the actual charge itself for which he was convicted all those years ago. But I think it's safe to assume it'll be on 2 grounds. They've hinted that it'll be, first of all, on his age. Ronnie Biggs is 71 years old. And secondly, on his health. He is understood to have had at least 3 strokes in his years in Rio de Janeiro. And I think they'll be saying, what's the point of keeping this aged, ill man in jail? Although, of course, Nick, the Crown Prosecution Service are likely to see it the other way round.
Thanks, Duncan. The Prime Minister has met Cabinet colleagues at Downing Street to finalise arrangements for the general election, which is expected to be held on June the 7th. It's thought Mr Blair could announce the date as early as tomorrow. Local elections take place on June the 7th, and William Hague has launched the Conservative Party's manifesto for that campaign. Mark Mundell reports.
Bank holiday it may be, but there's no rest for politicians, and John Prescott at least seemed to be looking forward to the fray. After this special cabinet, more smiling ministers, but they know they not only have to win, but convince people they've done enough to deserve to win. The Education Secretary and Health Secretary stood side by side to deliver the message.
And there will be a big choice for the country whenever the election comes. Either we can go forward to reform and invest in our public services, in health and education, in transport, the fight against crime, or we can go back to the days that we've seen in the past of cutback and closure.
The Conservatives are gearing up too with a new poster on tax. Today they're focusing on the other elections on June the 7th, those for the English county councils, where they're expected to do rather well. They've also got a new theme tune, written by the man who wrote the Wombles hits, and a new video urging people to banish Liberal Democrats and Labour from town halls in Brittian as they've spelt it. Mr Hague says they're ready to win at local and national level.
And we're ready to win because just as we have the miserable record of failure by Labour and the Liberals at a national level, we have the same record of Labour and Liberal failure, incompetence, arrogance, mismanagement and inefficiency at the local level.
The Liberal Democrats leader is already on the road campaigning in Portsmouth, where they're trying to hold on to a marginal seat. But Charles Kennedy says they'll do better than that.
Well, we're optimistic as we go into this campaign that all the trends in the second half of this Parliament point to us winning more votes across Britain and therefore achieving more seats in the next House of Commons.
What happens now is that each party will fight extremely hard to get their favourite subject at the top of the agenda. For their part, Labour say the Cabinet has just approved a manifesto which is richer and more substantial than in '97, and one that has challenging ideas on the public services. Mark Mardell, BBC News, Westminster.
The BBC's political editor, Andrew Marr, is in Downing Street. Let's think timetable first of all, Andrew. Queen returns from Sandringham to Buckingham Palace tomorrow morning. What are we expecting to see?
Well, we are now expecting that Tony Blair will go and see the Queen, ask for the dissolution of Parliament tomorrow, and that there'll be some kind of announcement, perhaps here, perhaps as early as something like 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. Now, no one's saying anything official about that, but frankly, after today's amateur dramatics of the Cabinet meeting on a bank holiday, there's no real point in waiting.
Labour, of course, pretty confident, but worried about voter apathy.
Well, the great nightmare is, what if we gave an election, had an election, and nobody came? What would it be like for us if the Labour vote, that huge Labour vote that they piled up in 1997, just doesn't bother to get off the sofa, walk along the street, and put an X on the ballot box? That's what's really worrying them. And the whole message from the Prime Minister today, as we heard Mark explaining, was about not being complacent, about going out there and selling on the core issues. It was very interesting that it was David Blunkett and Alan Milburn, Health and Education, who came out and said a few words afterwards. It's core public services. The Conservatives, meanwhile, will be also fighting on some of these public service issues, but their message, of course, completely different. Their message, Labour, frankly, haven't been very good at governing. They may say they want to reform the public services. Over the last 4 years, they've shown precious little sign of being able to do it.
Andrew, thank you. The Ministry of Agriculture says it's pressing ahead with plans to slaughter almost 1,000 cattle on a farm near Exmoor, even though there are no signs of foot and mouth disease there. The farmer has barricaded the farm and says he'll fight the ministry in the courts. But the National Farmers Union says the cull must go ahead to stop the virus devastating Exmoor.
A single cattle truck blocks the main entrance to Broford Farm. The Everard family have vowed to do everything possible to protect their animals, but the slaughter teams could arrive at any time, and the strain is beginning to show.
Very difficult indeed, and that's all we can just try and do, is to make maths see sense. And stop trying to blackmail. Stop this bloody nonsense of saying that all our neighbours want us culled. It's a bloody lie.
MAF insists the 1,000 cattle must be slaughtered, regardless of whether they have the virus or not, as the farm can be linked to the latest outbreak of the disease in Somerset. The authorities here are desperate to stop foot and mouth spreading to Exmoor, where they fear it would put the wild deer population at risk.
This particular farm is a dangerous contact. It is in the middle of Exmoor. Were we not to take action and disease were to develop on that farm, we would have a very significant problem on Exmoor, and our responsibility is to ensure that we don't reach that situation.
MAF have refused to discuss how they plan to gain access to this farm. But today, support for the cull came from the National Farmers Union and the Exmoor National Park Authority. Time, it seems, is running out for the animals at Broford Farm. Nick Thatcher, BBC News, Somerset.
Israel's Prime Minister Ariel Sharon has apologized for the killing of a Palestinian baby by Israeli troops. The 4-month-old girl died from shrapnel wounds after Israeli tanks fired on a refugee camp in the Gaza Strip. Israel said the camp was targeted in response to a mortar attack on Israeli settlements.
They had heard the shelling and came running. People here knew civilian homes must have been hit, and many found relatives wounded and dazed. As the injured were rushed to hospital, news that for one family, there was tragedy. 19-year-old Suzanne Hadjo will recover from her injuries, but she'll have to live with the fact that her 4-month-old daughter Iman was killed. The baby was among several children caught up in the shell fire. The Israelis say they targeted the area because it had been used as a firing position for attacks against Jewish settlers. In their grief, the Hadjo family reject that and this rare apology by Israel's Prime Minister.
I'm sure that our forces never had that intention to do it. I'm really sorry for that. And I'm sure that we'll make every effort to try and avoid tragic cases like this.
No such apology for the killing of Mohammed Abayat, a Palestinian gunman shot dead yesterday. At his funeral, more defiance, even as the Israelis intensify their military campaign. The Israelis know that their actions provoke Palestinian fury and risk international condemnation. Still, their message to these people and to the outside world is the same. There will be no compromise. Jeremy Cook, BBC News, Bethlehem.
On the third day of his visit to Syria, the Pope has travelled to the Golan Heights near Syria's border with Israel. He delivered a prayer for peace in the Middle East during a visit to Quneitra, a town which was completely destroyed by the Israelis in 1974. From there, Brian Hanrahan reports.
The Pope arrived in Quneitra to dancing from the Druze community of the Golan and a drumbeat of anti-Israeli comments from Syrian officials. The Syrians have kept Quneitra in ruin since Israel's pullback in 1974. The Pope was to pray in the wreckage of St. George's Orthodox Cathedral. The Israelis say it was battle damage, the Syrians malicious destruction.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God.
The Pope's prayer called for harmony and reconciliation. 150,000 Syrians lost their homes. They and their descendants were allowed back for the day, as the Pope blessed a tree for planting beneath the Israeli watchtowers. Israel controls territory up to a few hundred yards from Quneitra and farms right up to the line. The Syrians want their land back. This visit is a personal pilgrimage. Today, beneath the window where the Apostle Paul escaped Damascus, the Pope prayed. But nobody's disguising that today's events were overtly political. This trip has set off a new round of recriminations between Israel and Syria. That's made the Pope's gesture look less controversial, but it also means his appeal for peace is less likely to be heeded. Brian Hanrahan, BBC News, Damascus.
The Leeds United footballer Lee Bowyer has been banned for 3 games by the European governing body UEFA after being found guilty of stamping on an opponent during the Champions League semi-final against Valencia last week. The ban means Bowyer will miss both tomorrow night's return leg in Spain and the final should Leeds get there. Leeds say they will appeal against the decision. Snooker now, and Ronnie O'Sullivan is facing a late challenge from John Higgins at the Embassy World Championship final in Sheffield. O'Sullivan had established a 6-frame lead after a series of brilliant clearances. But Higgins fought back, taking the last 3 frames of the afternoon session. O'Sullivan now leads by 14 frames to 10. The match resumes later this evening. The main news again, the train robber Ronald Biggs is in Belmarsh prison in South London tonight. He was arrested by police after returning to Britain from his refuge in Brazil. There are news bulletins every hour on BBC News 24. I'll be back on BBC One with more news at 10:15.